Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Sex Ed Taught Me. This is your host, Natalie Walton. This week I have on Simone, who talks extensively about what it was like growing up with two moms and being in a house where sex was something that was more celebrated and openly talked about than something that was taboo. I am super excited to share this with you. We end up in a whole bunch of kind of caveats and fun stories. We talk about sexual health. We talk about the music festival that Simone grew up going to. And then just as a keynote, there's a statistic that I reference in this episode, and I wanted to beforehand kind of fix it. I was referencing an outdated one. So at this point, it's 17 states in the United States require program content to be medically accurate. So at some point, there will be a conversation about sex ed and the numbers around how many states actually require that information is medically accurate. So in case you were wondering, it's 17 states as of 2020, according to the Guttmacher Institute. So without further ado, here is Simone.
I'm Simone Shirazi. I'm a young adult and romance writer, mostly online. I work as a story lead for Radish Fiction, which is a serialized fiction app. We're essentially like the Netflix for books. So we have, user-generated content, and we also have in-house originals that our team comes up with. I'm from Washington, D.C., grew up here, and I'm still here. So yeah, that's about me in a nutshell.
All right, awesome. And can you tell me a little bit about DC? So can you kind of orient us in like where you grew up, who you grew up around, kind of what things were like socially or politically like in your area when you were growing up?
Yeah, so, good old East Coast. It was I would say I grew up in a slightly more affluent neighborhood. It was pretty white. Growing up, my elementary school and my middle school were predominantly white. So it's DC has a small town feel while also kind of being a relatively big city. And I spent the first few years of my life in DC proper, and then my family moved to the suburbs of Virginia, which was even whiter and a little bit, more affluent in that sense. And politically, I have to say, I've always been around more liberal people and neighborhoods and that kind of thing. I know where I live now, in the recent election, it went about 85% blue. So that definitely shaped my upbringing a lot.
Yeah. And then would you say like big schools, small schools, like private, public, kind of what was that like?
I went to public school mostly up until high school when I switched to a smaller, it was a cross between a public and private school. But yeah, my elementary school I think there were about like 40 kids in my class, and it was just got a little bit bigger in middle school. So it was relatively small, I'd say.
Yeah.
I know, because I hear about people who are just like, oh yeah, my graduating class in high school was like 1,000 people. And I'm just like, excuse me, what? That's a lot.
Yeah, I was trying to do mental math on like how many people I think I went to school with in elementary school. And I'm like, I can't come up with a great number, but I'm like, I think we had maybe 3 or 4 different classes for each age group, and each of those classes probably had, like 25 people in them or something. So I'm like, I can't even imagine, like I would like not meet everyone in my grade when I was in the school. So
exactly. It's just like when I was in school, it was like, if we didn't know everyone, it was just like, how do you not know everyone? So
And then when did you have kind of your first sex ed class? Like, was it a health class?
I think if I can remember correctly, it was a health class in 6th grade. So like we're talking about like school stuff here, like school sanctioned, like health class / sex ed. And I remember that it was the first year, it's a weird way to remember it, but it was the first year that I was taking Latin, and our health class, which was like overlapping with our gym class, needed a classroom where we could actually have this, sex ed lesson. And I remember it was in my Latin classroom. And so I was looking at a sculpture of like Julius Caesar or something while my PE teacher is going on and on about the human body. And I was just like, this is weird. Is this weird? It's weird.
And then, so what do you remember about your sex ed class? Which I know it's kind of a broad question, but like, do you remember kind of the direction it went in? So you mentioned growing up in more of like a liberal, blue leaning kind of environment, but was that reflected in your sex ed classes? Like, was it, abstinence based, maybe even comprehensive, or, that kind of idea?
It was pretty comprehensive, I would say. It definitely was not abstinence only, which I really respect. I know that, a lot of school systems do it that way. But from what I got, it's just so long ago at this point. From what I remember, it did, talk a lot about, sexuality and, I think there was a unit on like, STIs and stuff like that. And then of course, you have the, like the pregnancy sort of unit where you have to carry around an egg. Did you guys do anything like this? Because with ours, we were paired up and we had to take care of an egg for like 4 days or something like that and make sure it didn't break.
Yeah, it's funny because I didn't do that in a health class. I ended up doing it actually in like a home ec class, which I think is always really funny to talk about, that I took a home ec class in like my public school education. But it was actually, I learned so much from that class in terms of just like basic life skills. I'm really appreciative of it, but it's so funny to me because I think about it. I'm like, yeah, we did actually like carry around eggs with us. Like that was like and then there's somebody I think who ended up with like twins in the class or whatever it was, just to really, yeah, that is so funny. I think we had to build like little homes for them to make sure that they were protected, something like that. Yeah, that is so funny. I
like I distinctly remember my little egg basket and like all of like padding that I put in there to make sure my egg was going to stay safe and all that. And oh God, that's quite the throwback memory.
Well, and it's like, of course, that's exactly how babies work. I mean, like it's, the egg situation exactly the same as what I'd expect from, carrying a child around. So glad we did that.
Exactly. Same thing, you have to be worried about if you drop them, and that's about all that teaches you.
And then, so when you kind of think broadly about your experiences, was it these classes that introduced you to like I don't know like the idea of sex, if that makes sense? Like not saying, like your graphic understanding or like the first time or anything like that, but just like you kind of had this thought like, oh, like I think people are they dating? Are they doing like what's going on here?
Yeah. So for me personally, it wasn't my introduction to that whole kind of, like just sex ed in general. I have a very interesting upbringing in the sense that I have 2 moms who never kept it a secret from me as to how babies were born. Because I think it was important to them to explain to me that, in our society, they were not seen as, the quote unquote norm. And so they never wanted me to be confused about how things worked. So I think I got the first, like, this is where babies come from lesson when I was about 4 years old. And,
Wow.
Yeah, like really early on, because they never wanted me to be confused or misinformed about stuff. And, I think they wanted to make sure that when I started, getting old enough to ask questions like, okay, well, why does my friend have a mommy and a daddy while I have 2 mommies? And like, how does that work? Like all that kind of stuff. They wanted to preempt it and make sure that was something that I was informed on. And so they went full out. Like I've always had like, those like, those medical coloring books and stuff like that. And, like,
To be honest, I don't, but
oh, it's just me then.
I love that for you.
Yeah, that was like, oh my God. Now thinking back to it, I'm just like, this was very interesting, because like I think they wanted to make sure that like I had all the scientific knowledge as well. And like, yes, I was young, and like this is like from the ages of like I would say from like 4 to like 7 or 8 and stuff like that. Like, I was like willing to learn, and I didn't find any of it like weird or uncomfortable or anything like that. It was just like, this is the human body. This is how, these processes work. Like, this is how babies are made. This is how babies come into the world. Like, there are different ways for that to happen as well. And like that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I love that approach. And like, I think there will be people who hear that and they're like, oh my God, that's so young. Like, how could you possibly understand? But it's like, I mean, we learn what is it? The head, shoulders, knees, and toes song. Like, it's,
Yeah.
to me, it's no different. You're just learning body parts and you're learning how the body works and kind of just about people, you know what I mean? And it's also like, there are at least a couple of countries where it's pretty common for them, or at least they're trying to initiate starting sex ed as young as maybe like preschool or kindergarten. So it's really, I mean, not super unheard of. It's, if anything, it's really beneficial for people to actually understand their body from a young age, and it becomes less weird in that way and kind of takes away the stigma of like, wait, I have a vagina. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the feeling of like needing to kind of like whisper about it or feel really uncomfortable, or like, you reach the age of like 13 or 14 and you're still embarrassed to be like, oh, this is like how my body works, that kind of idea. I think that's really, really important. And I don't know, I kind of love that. I love the idea of like medical coloring books as a form of education. Like,
I mean, for sure. And it's, the thing is, like, I didn't even realize there was a stigma or a shame around it until, I started probably like middle school, or like maybe even like elementary school, but like when you like really start interacting with more kids, and you're finding that they didn't have the same education that you did about the human body and these functions and everything that goes on. And it was just, I always was taught to view it from like the scientific standpoint and not like the, oh my God, these are words we whisper about standpoint, like there was never anything shameful about it, because that's your body, and, that's what you have to live in. It was just one of those sorts of things.
yeah, absolutely. No, I love that, because I think it also shows that it's basically us. Like, we're the people who made all of this stuff weird. Like, we're the people who made us feel like we need to whisper. It's kind of a cultural thing. It's a societal thing. And it's like, it's super easy to dismantle it. I mean, like, your family's an example of that, where you didn't even realize that it was, anything to fret about. Like, it was just kind of oh yeah, like, duh, it's our bodies. Like, it's just, it's human.
That's just how it works. Yeah, that was how it was. And I don't want to like preempt any of your questions or anything, but I think it also came down to the fact that, my family was very just open about that kind of stuff. Like, we were all like willing to talk about it. Like, if there was something you thought was like odd going on with your body, or like, even if it was like, like just a simple thing, like you scrape your knee, and it's just like, well, how does the body heal itself? Like, how does that happen? Like, what is that process? So it was all about like learning about processes and just stuff like that in my family, which I really appreciate looking back on.
No, I really like that, because I think it takes away kind of the scariness of it, knowing that like a lot of these things are what our bodies are supposed to do. You know what I mean? Like, it might seem scary to like scrape your knee and then all of a sudden have like a scab, and like it feels really mysterious, but it's like, no, it's biology. I mean, it's our body, it's the way it works. And it's really it's validating. And I think that can build up to things like, understanding how something like a period would work, and making it feel a little bit less like, oh my God, what's happening? What is my body doing? Like, I don't understand what's going on right now. That I think it takes away a lot of that panic, and there's a lot of value in that, because I mean, like, my experience with, not to be like oversharing or anything like that, but it was like, my experience with getting a period was very like jarring. Like, it wasn't scary because I knew it was going to happen, but it was still kind of like, what is going on with my body? Like, what is happening right now? Or
like,
even just,
even though yeah, even though like, okay, this is going to eventually happen, like when it does happen, you're just like, oh my gosh, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Like, this is going down right now. But like, at least you have that education in the first place. So you're not like, thinking, oh my God, I have no idea what's happening. Am I dying? Like one of
Yeah.
those kinds of situations, which I know some of my friends, they dealt with because no one had talked to them about it before, they started their periods. And it was just like, they literally thought they were going to die.
It's like it's such a normal thing, like it's such a
Oh,
it's what happens. And yeah, we still have this feeling of like, well, they'll figure it out when they get there. And it's like, no, it would be really helpful to know before this happens. Thank you so much. Like,
yeah. It'd be nice to have a heads up. Would love that.
yeah. And then when you're thinking about kind of your experiences growing up, you mentioned your family having a lot of kind of, influence on your understanding of the body and everything like that. Did you have any other factors that really came into play? Like, did you learn anything from friends, or did pop culture play a role in anything that you were learning or understanding about yourself?
Yeah, there were quite a few influences. So I think the biggest one is I'm about to launch into a real story here. Um, it was the Michigan Women's Music Festival, which it's no longer a music festival, but it was a music festival that happened every summer in August, usually during my birthday. My birthday always fell within the week that this festival was happening. Um, and so it was, this festival up in Michigan, and it was women only. So it was a chance for women to kind of camp out for a week, listen to this music, go take like these like classes, just, share in that experience of being a woman. And my parents had been going for probably about 10 years before I was born. And then I went with them, like minus the year that I was born, for 13 years. So up until I spent my 13th birthday at the festival. And the thing about it was, a chance for women to just really express themselves in all different ways. And nudity was a big part of that as well. So I
I'm like,
learned
you told me about the festival, but like,
yeah.
wow, okay, so we're really getting into it.
Uh-huh. So yeah, I don't know how to properly put it all into words, but it's just like I saw a lot of the female body growing up. And I saw how many different shapes and forms it came in, and all of the bits and pieces, And, the thing about it was there was no shame there. You could reveal yourself without having to feel like you were being judged. And it was a very open and welcoming and peaceful and healing environment for a lot of people. And I think, the fact that this is where I spent every single summer for a week and a half in my very formative years really shaped how I view the human body, how I view sexuality, because, it was, there's a lot of lesbians. That was the thing. It was like kind of the lesbian festival. So, um, yeah, that was my main, experience growing up, was just seeing all these women in one place and just learning a lot.
No, and I think that's such a fun story because I mean, that is so unique to you. Like, that's just
Yes.
something where I think about it and I'm like, I don't think I know a single other person. Like, I don't even think I can name a person I grew up with who went to like a nudity beach, like anything to that. So that is so interesting. And I can imagine that being just really, I don't know. Like, I feel like it would make me feel so much more comfortable with my body. Like, I think it would have, especially growing up in it, because I think by the time I started going through, puberty and stuff like that, it was so jarring, and I just felt so like uncomfortable in my body, and I just like didn't know what was going on. I didn't know like what I was gonna look like. I don't know. And I feel like having people who are just kind of like showing me that it's okay to look like what I look like, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. I think there's something really, really wonderful about that.
Yeah, and in my family, the human form, especially the female form, was always really celebrated. And I mean, I'm using the cisgender, definitions here, but it was just nudity was just a thing. And you have like art on the walls of women with their breasts exposed, or just the shape of a human body in sculpture and stuff like that. And so I think like that was just my normal. And knowing that, some people felt shame seeing those kinds of things was new to me when I finally began to discover that. It was just like, oh, so okay, so we're not supposed to be uncovered. Like we're supposed to make sure this is, a hidden away thing. And that was the jarring part for me, I think, with growing up, instead of like the whole like trying to be a little bit like, I don't know, I wouldn't want to say freer, but like kind of in that sense of not feeling any shame in the human form.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I do actually kind of like the idea of like freer being the word, because I do feel like there's something kind of, I don't want to say constricting, because I know there's people who find a lot of comfort and a lot of empowerment in like the clothing that they choose to wear and how they represent themselves. But it's also, I
Yeah.
mean, we made this up for ourselves. Like, humans aren't born wearing any type of clothing. And it's just kind of a thing that we've built up and we've kind of put a lot of pressure on, is, covering up and making
Yeah.
sure we have certain body parts that are absolutely without question covered up. So it's, yeah, I think there's something really, like you said, really freeing about kind of being like, we don't have to. Like, we should have safe spaces where we can feel very comfortable dressing in the way that we want to dress, whether it's, wearing a lot of clothes, wearing no clothes, somewhere in between, that kind of idea.
Exactly. And like the thing is, it's just like, personally, I am far more comfortable when I'm more covered up. Which I think is so funny, but it's just like, I like to be cozy. I like my oversized sweatshirts. I like my leggings. I like my cozy socks. So it's just like, I'm just a cozy person at heart. And so I really like that feeling of being covered and being, just wrapped up. Like, I love that. But that's just me. But it's like, I see absolutely nothing wrong with each side. It's like, if your safe space allows you to, be, completely exposed, it's just like, that's wonderful. But also, if your safe space allows you to be covered from head to toe, like me with my blanket wrapped around my face, like that's amazing too. It's just whatever you are most comfortable with.
Yeah, no, and I think giving people that choice is really, really important and really vital for just kind of growing up and getting used to yourself and figuring out what you like. I think when you start getting into conversations of, like, you have to make sure you're dressing in this very particular way and you have to make sure you're representing yourself in this way, and, you have to make sure certain things are covered up with no discussion.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think it becomes just really constricting, and I think it can be really difficult because it's, it's self-expression, it's your body, like it's what you're putting physically on yourself and how you're looking to everyone else. And I feel like
Yeah.
everyone should be able to have a say in kind of how that works. So I'm not going to say like walk out in the middle of like, like a street and be naked in front of everybody, but like,
Yeah.
that kind of idea of like, just being able to have places and knowing and just kind of feeling comfortable in yourself and having because I know there's people who talk all the time about, like, I can't remember, maybe it's like a blog post or something, but it's this idea of just being able to like walk around your house naked, that kind of idea. Like, there's
Yeah.
people who find that very, very freeing. And it's like, yeah, all right. Like, I'm not going to stop you. Like, go for it.
Yeah, exactly. You're in the comfort of your own home. And if that makes you comfortable, like, go for it. Like,
Yeah,
I believe
exactly.
whatever makes you happy. Like, in your own home, I'm just like, do what you want.
And then, okay, so we talked a little bit about friends and kind of the idea of like how you realized starting maybe around middle school that your friends grew up a little bit differently. Do you think you learned anything from them when you were growing up? Like, did they tell you anything about sex that you were like, wait, that's kind of interesting? Or did you feel like you already had kind of this breadth of knowledge, so you didn't really learn anything from them?
I feel like, with kids, there's just a lot of misinformation because you're getting it from so many different sources. And I feel like I had that, I had my books, I had my, medical journal. Oh my God, I was such a nerd. Oh, wow. I, I had my medical journals and all that kind of stuff where it was just like, okay, so this is how this works and this is how that works. And it was just like, you hear, I think, when I was in one of those health classes and they were just talking about something that I already knew and I was just zoning out and I hear, and oh my gosh, they split us up, boys and girls in one room, boys in the other. They didn't have us together, of course. And so I just remember like zoning out, like being like, oh my God, I already know all this. Why do we have to learn it all again? Not really realizing that other people didn't have the same knowledge and information that I did. And I remember one of my friends sitting next to me and she just went, ew, that's so gross. And I was like, wait, what? What's happening? What are we learning about right now? Like, what about this is gross? Like, did I miss something? And then, just the giggles and stuff and like, like, ooh, that's gross. Like, ooh, who would do that? Like that kind of thing. And, when you're in middle school, you're trying to fit in. And like, here I am thinking, well, that's not gross. That's just a human bodily function. Like, that's just how this works. But, here I am finding myself awkwardly giggling along with them being like, yeah, that is gross, isn't it? So I always, like I tried to fit in with them that way. But like, if I did hear something that sounded like completely insane, like, oh my God, like Bobby kissed Melinda and now she thinks she's pregnant. And I'm like, that's not how it works. There's a lot more that goes into it than just kissing. And it was just like, I kind of found myself in that position of being like, not the one to like rain on their parade, but like, be like, no, you guys, that's not how it works. But then like, you have people who are so set in their beliefs that, just a kiss will get you pregnant and like that kind of thing. It's just like, okay, well, I've done what I can. Like I've tried to share my knowledge, but I'm glad that I never really bought into like the little rumors and giggles too much.
Yeah, no, it's so funny you use that example because I was actually one of those kids who for a while was like, wait, so kissing can do that? Like I don't really understand. For me it was actually I've used the story before, so it's going to show up in a couple of different episodes, but for Secret Life of the American Teenager, the whole thing with like, oh, we just kissed, like we didn't do it. Like I never actually watched the show, so I didn't understand the context of it. I would just see the ads and it was like, no, we never did anything more, we just kissed. And then she ends up being pregnant and I was like, oh my God. It's like, so it's,
oh no.
it's like kissing does it? Oh my God, oh my God. And I'm like, I wish I could remember kind of what helped me get out of that. Cause like, I only remember learning that. Like, I don't remember the process of like actually being informed that it was more than just that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just so, I don't want to say funny because like, it's actually kind of scary how that kind of information gets passed around and like how long it takes us to realize that it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Especially growing up. And because like, there are some people who will never really get the real information until, they're in that situation. And, I think it's important to have knowledge before,
Yeah, absolutely.
so you're not worried like, oh my God, I kissed Bobby. Like, oh no, am I going to get pregnant now? Like, just to, first of all, peace of mind. And second of all, like not perpetuating that misinformation.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I not to bring up Glee of all things. Like I like I hate this for myself, but I remember oh God, it's been so long since I watched the first season of it, but I think one of the conversations they had was like, you can't get pregnant in a hot tub or something like that. And like, it's this whole thing of like, like clearly false information. That's just like blatantly not true. And it's pretty explicit in the show that that's not true. But I think about it all the time because I'm like, that is totally the kind of thing that would catch on. Like there's ideas that like, you can't get pregnant if you're standing up. You can't get pregnant if, you have sex at a certain time of the evening. Even just stuff like the idea that like pulling out works,
right.
which is a little bit more like boring, but like it's, it's still something that people would say. I just think it's so interesting that this stuff really does catch on and people just, keep sharing it with each other and they're like, no, no, it's totally fine. Just like have sex in a hot tub, but you can't get pregnant. Like,
Yeah. And it's like, that kind of stuff is dangerous.
yeah.
And it leads to, situations that could have been avoided. Especially, when it comes to, STIs and, when it comes to condom use and that kind of stuff. It's just like, these have real effects on people's lives. It's just like this misinformation, like, can be really harmful. And the fact that, it takes so long in some cases for, the truth, the real information to come out and come around. It's just, by then it might be too late.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I was actually just thinking the same idea with STIs and STDs and kind of this idea that all of those perpetuate the idea that the thing you need to be most concerned about and the only reason why you'd use protection is to avoid pregnancy. And it's
Right.
like, well, that's not true. Like, that's just not how it works. Like condoms are so much more than just pregnancy. And I think that definitely gets lost kind of in the dialogue and the conversation. And yeah, I don't know. It's like you were saying, it's really kind of scary. It's like, okay, so we're passing on essentially false medical information. And I think part of it too is like, most sex ed, like it's a huge majority, I think, of sex ed classes don't require any sort of like medical information. Like they don't say, like, I think it's maybe 13 states explicitly say you don't have to have proper medical information in your sex ed classes. And it's like, or 13, I can't remember what the specific statistic is, which is really embarrassing that I'm trying to say it, but it's one of those things where it's
been there.
It's it's a study of some kind, basically saying that there are states that it was the Guttmacher Institute, so somebody can fact check me on this, but it's a study that there are sex ed classes in states that fully say you don't have to use medical information. Like it's you probably should, but like it's not actually required. And it's just that is so interesting to me that there are states that will still hold true to this and are kind of just like, yeah, I mean, it doesn't, like, we're hoping it'll be true, but like we're not going to require anybody to make sure that it's true. We don't need medically accurate information. We don't need evidence-based information. And it's like, really? Like,
that is wild to me.
Yeah. No, it's such a jarring statistic. So I remember doing research on it for a policy proposal, and I was just like, I cannot, like, that's part of the reason why I feel so like strongly about all of this stuff is like, it's just so weird to think about how much we kind of just let slip through and how much we kind of say, yeah, sex ed classes are like important and everything, but like kids will get their information elsewhere. And then it's like the sources of their information is like their friends who are saying stuff like, you can't get pregnant standing up or,
or like
whatever.
From Glee, like from the pop culture that we consume. And I think actually this is kind of leading into kind of what I do for work. Bear with me. And the thing is, I know a lot of kids and, me as well, like got a lot of information about sex from fiction, from books.
Yeah, me too.
And growing up on the internet, like I'm a little older than you, so the internet was I would say a little wilder back in the day. With this fan fiction, and that's where I learned a lot. Like other than like the medical, like kind of sterile sort of information, the emotional aspect of it, or that kind of thing, I learned a lot from reading online. And reading those stories that, people would tell on their own. And it was just like, back in the day, we had this rating system where we use citrus to tell you how like steamy or hot it would be. So like if it was a lemon, be careful, like it's going to be a wild one. And so, I feel like media in that way definitely taught me a lot, but like in a different way, not in like the, these are the facts sort of way, but like this was someone's interpretation of it way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I read a lot. I mean, the internet, it had no rules. It still has no rules, And so pretty much anyone could read anything. And the things that I have stumbled upon in my many years could scar some people for life. And so, the company I work for now, Radish, we have a system where we create our own original stories and, produce them in-house. But a lot of the stories we work on are romance or have elements of erotica in it. And as a company, we had to, we have these sort of like not exactly a manual, but we have standards of, we always try to mention condom use, and we always try to make it clear that like this is safe sex and that sort of thing, because you never know who your audience is going to end up being. Like you could have an audience that is well informed about things, and you could have an audience that's not. And you're never really particularly sure who you're going to reach. So it's always in your best interest to make it clear, how these things are going. Like, are they using a condom? Are they being safe? Is consent involved? That kind of thing. And I think that's really important in a lot of fiction and in just a lot of media in general.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know specifically things like consent and condom usage has been a huge debate in porn specifically, which is, I mean, it's kind of the same idea of like consuming media for the sake of, like arousal, I guess, not to sound like a textbook, but it's, it's, the same idea. And I know there was a lot of backlash about, how it's going to take away from the fantasy and how kind of like, it's, no, I just want to focus on like the sexy part of it, but you're absolutely right about you don't know who's going to be consuming it. I mean, I know there's kind of a general idea on the internet of like, don't market toward younger readers, and this is all for 18 plus, and like I know for porn specifically it's like you're supposed to be 18 to watch it and that kind of idea, but it's I mean, the internet it's
anyone can access anything.
Exactly. If they know it's there, they'll find it. So it's I think it's really key just kind of having an understanding of who might find it. Like, not that you're trying to like gear it toward it, it's just like who could find this and who's going to be influenced. Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really interesting thing that it's kind of showing up in other realms too. Because I don't I think about the idea that it's inherently like not sexy, or it takes away from the moment if you're like asking for consent or like talking about like condom usage or anything like that. And it's this idea of like, why do we even think that's not sexy to begin with? You know what I mean? Like, why do we view that as something that takes away from the moment rather than it's just like part of the conversation? Because I mean, realistically, it is part of the conversation for a lot of people. Like it's, it's done in different ways and different people communicate, the same idea in different ways. But I mean, we're essentially asking for consent, or at least asking for, protection, or having those kind of casual back and forth conversations of like, okay, let's kind of set some rules here. And it's, I think when we say stuff like that, it sounds very formal, and it's like, oh my God, we need you to sit down and have a very direct conversation about how exactly you're going to go about this and what exactly is going to happen. And it's like, no, it can still happen in the moment, and it's still, and I actually really like the idea of things like Radish and things like porn kind of being like, hey, this is how you can still have these conversations in ways that feel very human and are also still part of it and don't take you out of the situation, but are still very important to see.
Exactly. Because I mean, it is part of the moment, and it shouldn't be excluded for, the sake of the fantasy. It's just like, I understand that reasoning some people have. And for some people, I guess it does take them out of the moment when they're consuming that media. But I mean, I think it needs to become more commonplace that it's kind of put back into that moment, and that it's made clear that no, this is necessary. This is part of it. Like you can't really remove it from the situation without, kind of making it I don't want to say, a dangerous situation, but like, making it's not going to be unsexy. Let's put it that way. So, it's one of those things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then, so when you're kind of thinking about growing up and kind of, I think you have a really interesting trajectory too, and your understanding of sex from a young age. But do you think kind of what you were taught from a young age made going into something like Radish easier? Do you feel like you kind of had like a certain path, like how, like was it still jarring for you kind of working in a situation where you're working with, very sexy kind of pieces of work and kind of, erotica and that kind of idea?
Yeah, I mean, I will admit, like, I am very open-minded when it comes to sex, and it's just, one of those things where, it's still a work environment, and so you're still trying to figure out, okay, like, how do I balance, like, not being vulgar towards my coworker while we're trying to figure out how this story is going to work, while making sure the story still stays that fantasy that people want to read. So there are moments where it can be a little jarring, and then you're like, okay, wait a second, like, this is our job, we are professionals, and you move forward. So it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I get that. And then like, so when you're thinking about kind of how you grew up, kind of what your understanding of sexuality was based on what you were taught from, your parents, based on what you were taught from your school, from your friends, like how would you summarize your understanding of sexuality? Like if you could give like a one or two word phrase on like what that means to you and what you were taught to think about sex, what would it be?
Um, hmm. Wow, that's a really good question. In a few words, I think I don't want to sound super cliche, but just knowledge is power. Like, is that a weird thing to say?
No, I
Like,
love that. I think that's a really great way of looking at it, actually.
yeah, because I think, if you have that knowledge, if you have that background information, it really just helps you going into future situations. Sometimes, emotions are high in those moments. And if you can fall back on that basic information, that scientific stuff that you know about how certain things work, I think that can be very helpful, and makes it a little less scary.
Yeah, absolutely. No, because I really do feel like things like sex get kind of like mythologized. Like it's this kind of idea of like, oh my God, it's this huge life-changing moment. And it's like, I mean, it's just biology when it comes down to it. Like I'm not going to belittle and say, it's not important and it's not a, decision that you have to make, but it is something where it's like, I mean,
Right.
it doesn't have to be scary. Like it's not something where you have to go into it feeling like your entire life is going to change because of it. Like it's, I mean, it's just something new. It's just something new that you're doing with your body, something new you're doing with another person. Like it's really, I think it's question, like I don't want to say it's, like, risky or anything like that, but I do think it's questionable to keep perpetuating this idea that like something is going to change so dramatically when it happens. And it's like, no, it's just, part of a relationship, and it should feel comfortable for you, and it should feel fun, and it's, it's okay to be nervous, but it's, it's I don't like the idea of perpetuating that it's scary in a way or intimidating. Like it's just something you're doing with a partner.
Exactly. And I think, this applies for any situation. It's just like, I know that I like to have, some sort of background before walking into a situation, or like if you're about to go into a meeting and you have done no preparation, like, you have no idea what the meeting's going to be about. Like, of course you're going to be really nervous going into that. And I think it helps, if you've prepared in a way, if you have that background knowledge of knowing what you're about to experience, like even if you don't know it firsthand just yet, just having that background and that little bit of information, no matter how small it is, can really help.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I actually really like kind of that comparison because it's really true. It's, if you have a little bit more of an understanding, and maybe even like it's going to sound boring, but even having a little bit of that medical background and understanding what exactly is happening with your body and why your body might react in a certain way is really, and I think it's empowering too, to be like,
Yeah.
hey, this is because I think often the conversation kind of falls like speaking in kind of, a cis het way. It kind of falls on men and the priority of men and what men are doing in the scenario. And it's like, I think especially when you're teaching young women who typically are not the center of the conversation, kind of how their bodies are working
Yes.
and how their body will respond is really empowering and really important.
Absolutely. That is a really wonderful point to make, because women and girls aren't usually the center of those conversations. It's just, for a lot of, I know for a lot of women, it comes off as sex is something that happens to you almost, not
Mm-hmm.
that like you are an active participant in it, which is always just been such an odd way of viewing it, to me at least.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because it definitely is something where it feels like the guy will do it and then that's it. Like the girl will just
Yeah.
kind of like be part of it. Like you're supposed to just kind of go along with it and see what happens. And you can have some fun, but it's almost like you're a rare like it's almost
Yeah.
like you're a rarity if you're someone who's like, oh, I love having sex, this is like I love doing this and doing this. And I think it's starting to become more normalized, and people are starting to realize like, duh, women are supposed to be having fun too. Like it's not just
Yeah.
and like, I mean, we see things like this with even dating back to like Sex in the City, and I'm sure even before that, where people are having these really open conversations and saying, hey, for a really, really long time, women have been excluded from this, even though we're part of it. We are actively engaged in this. We want to enjoy it too. But I
Yeah.
think, the biggest piece now that's missing is kind of having genuine conversations and saying, hey, this is how your body works. You can use it how you want to. Like it's okay to figure out how it works. It's okay to figure out, what your partner needs to do for you to make you happy, that kind of idea. It's okay to ask for things.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's just a really important conversation to have and keep having.
Yeah, absolutely. And then kind of this is going to be an interesting question, I think, for you, just because you started off in kind of a different place from, I think, at least, speaking for, you started off in kind of a different place from a lot of
Yeah.
people growing up. How has your understanding of sex changed over time? Has it? Or do you feel like because you started so young with kind of your understanding of the body and people and relationships that you kind of like it felt like there wasn't really anything new for you as you grew up?
Um, I mean, I feel like, you're always growing and learning things. And I think, I had a very, clinical textbook understanding of things. And I think learning about the emotional aspects more so was something that developed over time, and through my own experiences. And so I think that's, something that a textbook can't exactly teach you. I mean, it can, talk about things for sure, but I think there's, that emotional connection that isn't really discussed a lot. And yeah, just that's something that you discover about yourself as well as you get older.
Yeah, no, I actually think that's such an interesting perspective to have, because I feel like a lot of us are kind of taught almost that the emotional aspect is what comes first. It's like I
Mm.
remember the sex ed that I had. We ended up having this lesson that basically said like, the more partners you have, the less attached you're going to be to them, and that kind of idea. And it's
Oh,
yeah, exactly. And it, is very heavily on this idea of like, psychological and emotional and physiological bonding with somebody else. And it was like, you're making this decision and it's involving another person, and you're probably going to form some sort of bond to them for the rest of your life, which was, I mean, a really kind of intimidating way to look at
wow.
like, yeah, like it's not meant, it wasn't, in the sense of, oh, like, even, like I don't, it was such a weird way of approaching it and so daunting, because they were like, well, I think the implication was, only do it with people that you are truly in love with, that kind of idea. But it's like,
Yeah.
there's just something so like, oh God, like this is like the most serious decision I'm ever going to make. Like this person is like my person forever. Like this is, and it's like, that's,
That's
imagine sitting in front of a room of like 14-year-olds and being like, yeah, okay, so here you go. Like good luck in adulthood.
That's extremely stressful just hearing it now as an adult. Like, I cannot imagine hearing something like that at 14. It's just like, yes, I do understand for some people that like sex is a big deal. And, the emotional attachments that, are created and stuff like that are a big deal, but it's I think to generalize and make it seem like it's like that for every person can be an issue, and kind of stress onto like literal teenagers, and that kind of like putting that fear in them is really scary.
Yeah, no, I constantly, like, that's like one of those things that has just really stuck with me. 'Cause I'm like, wow, that is such a, like, a strong take. Like, it's just,
That is.
that's really such a statement to have to make, especially growing up in a culture where we're taught, like, casual sex, like this idea of like casual relationships and stuff like that. Because I mean,
Yeah.
like, it's like we'd see all these TV shows, we'd see trailers for things. I mean, it's like I think at this point it's hard, like it's almost difficult to find a TV show marketed toward teens or toward adults that doesn't feature some element of like casual sex or like having multiple partners in some capacity, even like multiple, like, even just something like boyfriends or girlfriends or people you're casually seeing, or even like, getting divorced and getting remarried, that kind of idea. Like, it's a really interesting kind of way to talk about it and to approach it when we're being exposed to totally different messaging in so many other aspects of our lives.
Yeah, that's the thing. A lot of it conflicts. And so you're kind of left wondering, well, okay, which one do I believe? Which school of thought do I personally follow? And that's just, ooh, that's a tough process. That's a journey. You
Yeah,
have to figure out what's best for you.
absolutely. Yeah, but I think it's so interesting how you grew up and it kind of like flips so much of what a lot of us were exposed to. And I mean, I don't want to generalize about like sex ed, because like every person has such a like unique experience with just learning about it and what they were told and what they were taught. But it really does feel like a lot of the things that you were taught are like, you focus so heavily on, the medical aspect. You started so young. And then there's so many people where it's, their sex ed didn't start until they had their first sex ed class at, maybe 14. And
Yeah.
then their conversation was very heavily, maybe oriented on like the, okay, don't have sex because you will be emotionally bonded with your partner forever. And then eventually you'll,
Woo.
lose the ability to like love people. Like, it's, once you have enough partners,
Wow.
you lose your capacity to, yeah, yeah.
I mean, it reminds me of that scene from Mean Girls. Like,
Yes,
don't have sex, you'll get pregnant and die. Like,
that's exactly what it felt like. It was this feeling of just dread. And it's like, okay, so I have to be super, super careful about this. And it's like, it takes away all of the potential fun of relationships. And it's kind of like, it like it suddenly makes it this super stressful, like, okay, so what's going to happen next? Like, what's the deal here? Like,
yeah.
what am I supposed, what, like, that
Ooh.
kind of idea. Yeah. No, and it's just I mean, it would be interesting, I think, to hear from people who went through this and like tried to navigate dating in that context. Just because, like, for me, it was such a weird experience of like hearing that and not really wanting to date men in the first place. So I was like, all right, that's super easy. Like it's,
We can
I mean,
avoid that.
yeah, it's like, okay, so I'm like stressed for some reason. Like, for some reason, I'm really worried about this, but also like not really for some reason.
Yeah.
Like, so it's, yeah, I just think it's really interesting how much can affect our perspective and how much kind of comes into play, and what kind of what you were saying before about what source do we believe, like who's going to have the strongest impact on us. And I don't really know if there's like a secret formula to it. Like, it just seems like there's certain things that really resonate with different people in different ways. For me, it was the fear mongering aspect, like kind of this idea of
Yes.
like, don't do it, it's scary, it's bad, really had an effect on me. Whereas for other people, it was, kind of a motivating factor, and they were like, well, okay, you're telling me not to do it, I'm gonna do it
I'm going to do
anyway.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's, yeah, I don't know. And then for you, the idea that you stuck by kind of your parents and kind of how you were raised, rather than getting sucked up in, the rumors, or like kind of the, I don't know what to call them, kind of just the it sounds really serious, feel like the false information that your friends were spreading, but like the, the
It's true though, and like like I didn't have to learn from TV shows or from fiction or from, random teenagers around me. And I consider myself pretty lucky for that. But it really just goes to show how different this education is for every single person.
mm-hmm. And it just becomes so evident, I think, when you have conversations with people. And I think that's part of, I mean, I talk about this, but the reason why I wanted to start this podcast was because there's people, like yourself, who have these experiences that are totally different from, even me, and then versus, somebody else from a different location. It's really, really interesting how, I mean, we're all from the same country, we're all growing up around the same general era. Like, it's, there's really no reason why we should all be receiving these dramatically different sex ed classes, because I think the foundation of it was that, if you're not learning it at home, you learn it in school, and like they kind of are supposed to supplement each other. But for a lot of people, they're not getting it at home, and then they're also not getting it at school. So it's kind of like, what are they supposed to do then? What are you supposed to,
where are you supposed to learn, and what
exactly.
are you learning?
And then I think that's where, a lot of people end up with their perspective from, like, fan fiction and reading books and things like that, which, like, I mean, I'm not gonna pass any judgment, but it is kind of a, like, do we really want people learning how sex works from, like, random fanfic that they found online? You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of this question of, like, we have these resources and we're trying to teach these classes, and we're spending money paying for, teachers to teach these. We're spending money on curriculum. Like, why is it that students still feel the need to go home and search up, different questions online, or Google things, or, find things like fan fiction to, like, answer questions for themselves? Because I remember having to, like, Google things and just be like, wait, so what does this mean? Like, when somebody says this term, what is this addressing? Or, like, I remember this is so embarrassing, but I remember actually at one point Googling, like, this, oh God, I was, I can't remember how I ended up on this, like, path, but I was at school. Oh God. I was at school, and I remember trying to find, like, virtual games, I guess, to play, because I was, like, in a computer class or whatever. And I remember a website popping up that was like, oh, this one has really fun, like, virtual games or whatever. It's kind of fun. It's whatever. So I searched it online, and it was blocked by my computer because it, like, I guess contained some, like, questionable or, like, pornographic material. I can't remember the exact phrasing of it. And I was, oh God, poor little old me had to look up what pornographic meant.
Oh no.
On my school computer. Like, I had to search it, and, like, I just, like, searched, like, oh God, I think about it, I'm like, I cannot believe that had to happen. And I just think about all of the other people who did the same thing, where they had to, Google search and just hope that they can put the pieces together and figure out, rather than having somebody to go to and be like, hey, I saw this thing online, like, for some reason this website was blocked, saying that it contained, like, pornographic material. Like, what does that mean? It's I don't know. I feel like there's something really valuable about having resources and people in your life who can kind of be like, hey, like, this is what this is. Like, just letting you know, not going to tell you if it's good or bad, but just, this is what you're getting yourself into if you do that. So yeah, it's just, I don't know. I really like the idea of having different sources. And I mean, I don't want to make any assumptions about how you talk to your parents about sex, but I like the idea of kind of starting that conversation early and being like, hey, it's okay to ask questions and to learn things, and to, treat your body like how your body should be treated, and how you, deserve to have your body treated. But actually that's kind of a good segue into a next question, which is, like, do you feel like you were able to be open with the adults in your life? Like, I'm not going to ask you to be super revealing about your relationship with your parents, but, like, in a general sense, like, do you feel like you had adults you could go to, or was it very much like, okay.
Absolutely. It was just like, my parents have always been open and honest about that kind of stuff. And it's never been, something, I know I keep saying this, but, like, it's never been something to be ashamed of in my family. And they've always been, and, like, they've always encouraged me to ask questions. It was always like, they were the kind of parents where, oh God, I was such a little ass as a kid. Like, I was that kid who would just keep continuously asking, why? Okay, but why? And bless them, they just have amazing patience, because they answer every single one of my whys. And, they, even when I got to that last why and, like, nodded and said, oh, okay, I understand. they would look at me and say, "Are you sure you don't have any more questions?" And it was never like the condescending kind of thing. It was just the like, okay, have we covered this entire topic the way you wanted to, or do you have more questions? And it was, like just so encouraging.
Oh,
And
I love that.
I know,
That's like, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say before that that was their relationship with their parents in terms of like asking questions and being able to be that open. Like, I mean,
yeah.
I don't even think I got like a sex talk from my parents. Like, I was handed a book and they were like, good luck. Like,
No, my parents have always been like, and if they didn't know the answer to something, it was always, oh, let's go look it up together. Or let's go to the library and find a book about that. Like just about any topic, really. It was always, let's learn about this thing together. And, I really appreciate that. And it's like, gosh, I know how lucky I am to have the parents that I do. And it's just like that's the thing. It's just like, at that point they were ready and prepared to have a child. And, they always like to joke that I cost the same price as a brand new BMW to conceive. um, and so, they wanted to be the absolute best parents they could be. And they knew that included being open and honest with me.
oh, I love that. That's just
Yeah.
it's so nice to hear that too. And it's so refreshing, I think, to meet people who have this really open, because I know there are people who've had really inclusive sex ed. Like there's, like a handful of people out there and a handful of schools that do just really exceptional jobs. But it's really nice to hear like when there's parents and children who have figured out how to communicate properly, like they've figured out how both parties kind of talk about these things and they've managed to learn kind of from each other. They have conversations. I think that's so important. And
Yeah.
it's really kind of unfortunate that, sex ed in some ways comes down to luck. Like it's, who are you growing up with? Who are you growing up around? What kind of resources does your school have? And I mean, that's, not to get to a whole conversation about like inequity and like the state of the United States in general, but like it feels like that's, for a lot of things it's very much coming down to luck. And it's
Yeah.
for sexual health, it just seems like something that should never have come down to luck. Like, I mean, really no resources in life should be that way, but sexual health is like, that should be bare minimum. Like that should be something where everyone should have access to understanding what your body can do, what it does, what kind of, like not to be scary, but like what kind of potential diseases can be
Yeah.
passed, what kind of, negative consequences there are. Like it's, people need those honest conversations because they do happen. And it's, you have to learn eventually, and it's better to learn it before it happens than learn it as it's happening.
Yeah. And I think, the same thing can be like about pregnancy. And I think as a culture, we view it as this like beautiful, wonderful, like bringing of life, but we don't really talk about all the things that happen to your body and happen afterwards. And, all the things that change and like just all of that. And I think that's important to mention too, because I think that's, glossed over in the whole thing. And I think there's a stigma around that as well, and it's just we just got to do better all around, I
Oh,
think.
absolutely. Yeah. And it's actually really interesting you bring that up because it's reminding me of how whenever we do talk about like the negative aspects of pregnancy, it's almost always weight gain. Like that's like the extent of
Yeah.
the conversation is like, oh, the worst part about having a baby, like obviously there's the, lack of sleep and stuff like that. But like when talking about the physical changes you go through, it's like, oh, I gained so much weight when I had my baby.
Yeah.
And it's, the baby weight is really difficult to lose. And it's like, that's the narrative that we're, it's like, that really sucks that that's what we're telling people is like, the only thing that's going to happen to their baby or happen to them when they are pregnant and having a baby. It's like, it's a little bit more complicated than that and can be, I think, a little bit
Yeah.
scary for people. Like it's especially, I think it's better to be aware going in and, all of the different things that might change for you rather than getting pregnant and then having to learn them as they're happening. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh my God, wait, what? Like, what's
Exactly.
like, excuse me, what's happening? What's going like,
Yeah. And
yeah.
just all of the changes in general, I think that our bodies go through from, puberty all the way up until, like menopause for women and stuff like that, it's just not talked about.
Absolutely.
And, you know, there's only so much you can cram into those sex ed classes for like middle school and high schoolers. And I think there's just this assumption that, oh, you'll learn along the way. But, it would be nice to have that prior knowledge before we have to learn along the way.
Yeah, yeah. Because it's, I was just thinking about the idea of like, being able to check your body and like knowing what's normal for like a, like a breast or something, or like being able to pick up on when maybe something's wrong and maybe you're getting sick, or like you should go to a doctor. It's like, if you're not aware of your body, it's like, you're not going to
Yeah.
know how to check for that stuff. And like, it's, I know it's starting to become a conversation, and it's been a conversation, but like, I never learned in my classes, like, this sounds weird, but like what a breast looks like, and what
Yeah.
a sign of like early breast cancer might look like. And I know that seems really scary to teach a bunch of like 14-15-year-olds, but it's like, if you're not going to provide the resources to teach us later and really keep pushing, like this idea that you have to learn as you're growing up, it's like we should be trying to teach all of these different things, or at least providing lifelong resources for people to go back to and be able to say, oh yeah, I remember, maybe learning a little bit about that back in like, when I was in high school. Maybe I need to look into that again. That kind of idea, just kind of making them aware of different things and being able to kind of learn their body better and feel more comfortable with it, and pick up on when things might be weird, or just knowing when they're perfectly healthy and when something is how it's supposed to be, even if it's,
Yeah.
Uncomfortable, like period cramps, that kind of idea.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And there's a lot of that revolves around periods that it's just not talked about. It's just like, oh, it's supposed to be this 28-day cycle, and if yours isn't, like, you're not normal, like, one of those kinds of things. And it's like, we don't talk about PCOS, and we don't talk about endometriosis, and debilitating cramps and migraines and all the things that, hormonal swings and all of that stuff that goes along with having a period. It's just, we're essentially taught like, okay, well, it's every 28 days, you bleed for like anywhere between 3 and 5 days. And then that's all you know. And it's just like, okay, well, what's considered to be too heavy? What's considered to be, like too long of a cycle,
Oh,
that kind of thing.
absolutely. Yeah.
It's
And
just
it's,
like never discussed.
yeah, no. And like, not to get, you know, I don't know, like graphic or anything, but like it's
Yeah.
the same idea with like, discharge and things like that. Like the conversations, like there's people who, like will hear medical terms of like, oh, normal amounts. And it's like, well,
What's
what,
normal?
yeah, like what does that mean?
Yeah.
Like, how am I supposed to know exactly like what is happening here? And I just think that's so key, is just being able to say like, this is like, there's a lot of different things that are considered normal, and this is how you can kind of identify, and these are some things that you should be looking out for. It's
Yeah.
so important. And it's like, I feel like I learned more about like how dicks worked, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like everyone was
sure.
just kind of like, here, this is the function. And it's like, okay, great, like that's good for me to know, but also like it would be nice to know like what I could expect to, and like what's going to happen with me. And
Yeah.
I don't know. And I just think part of that is, yeah, it might be easier to talk about because it's a little bit less complicated and there's a lot of different elements, but I do think part of it too is just like nobody really wants to talk about it, and they're all like, well, why do men need to know? And it's like, well, when we have male politicians who are in charge,
Yes.
or male doctors, it's like I want to make sure they know what they're talking about. Like it would make me feel a lot better if they actually understood how the human body worked, especially a body that might not look like theirs. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's just, yeah, it's kind of like, you might not think they need to know it, but suddenly they're going to need to, or they're going to want to, or it just, they should, because it's how bodies work. And for some of them, they will be having sex with those bodies at one point. So it's like,
Exactly.
they should know. It's just, I think it's decency and just kind of a, I don't know, like it's anatomy. It's the human body.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be something where we're so specific and so binary about it. And so like, you only need to learn about the body that you look like.
Yeah. And it's just important to have that well-rounded education in that sense of knowing what, someone who's different from you, like has to deal with. And
Yeah.
just, I just think it's important for everybody to know.
Yeah, absolutely. I really, because I do think there's people who are still learning kind of like the effects that birth control has, or the
Oh yeah.
effects that, like, so even things like pregnancy or periods, where it's kind of like, oh yeah, like you'll see mood swings, or like for pregnancy you might get morning sickness, or you'll get like, random food cravings or something like that, when it's a lot more complicated than that. And birth control in particular, which is, something that, can be for pregnancy, but it's also something a lot deeper than that, and it can help women with a lot of different ways, but it also has frankly crazy effects on the body. Like, it's, I mean, birth
Absolutely.
control is not some sort of like, it affects hormones, it affects the entire body in so many different ways. And it's, it'd be nice if people understood that, particularly,
Yeah.
men, like men who don't necessarily need to worry about it, or for them the extent of it is, oh yeah, my girlfriend or my partner's on birth control, so we don't have to worry about pregnancy. Like, that's
Yeah.
the extent of what they know. And it's like, well, it's a little bit more than
More
that.
than
Like,
that.
it's
Yeah.
it's like, it might be good for you to understand.
Right. And just all the different forms of birth control
Oh,
that exist.
absolutely.
And the fact that it's not a one size fits all. It's just like, some people have really terrible reactions to the pill, but the ring worked for them. Or, the depot shot compared to the implant, stuff like that. And just, all the different varieties that exist. And because I think a lot of people think like, oh, there's one type of pill and that's about it. But it's like, no, there's probably about 50 different, configurations of hormones for birth control on the market. And like, name brand could be completely different from the generic. It's like, oh, I could
Yeah,
go on about birth control
absolutely.
for days, but
Yeah, no, it's just so hard, I think, hearing people simplify all of these different things that happen to the body,
yeah,
and all of these different things that, like, not to speak in like a cis binary way, but kind of the, women in general,
yeah,
are dealing with, and the different things that the body goes through that they just aren't necessarily informed about. And it's like, not only is it the people themselves don't know what's going on with their body, but the people around them might not understand, and they might not get it, and they might simplify it. Or, I mean, we all know the running jokes about women with their mood swings, and, oh, it's her period, or,
mhm,
that kind of idea, where it's like, well, if you were going through this, I don't think you would be so lighthearted.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
like I don't think you'd want to crack jokes if you actually understood what was happening for a lot of people, and how this genuinely felt. And it's not an exaggeration for a lot of people, and it's really, it's so hard to try and explain that. It's, because it is something that a lot of people go through, you know roughly once a month, or every 28 days, or whatever the cycle length might be. But
Mhm.
just because it happens that frequently doesn't mean our bodies necessarily are kind to us during it. You know what I mean? Like,
Exactly.
it's like, it's, there's people who have debilitating cramps, who go through immense amount of pain in different parts of their body for, I don't really have the medical background, but it's, just general ideas of understanding. It's more than just, you might be a little grumpy, like,
Yeah,
that kind of
exactly.
idea.
It's like, no, I actually can't get out of bed today. I'm in so much pain, kind of deal.
Hmm.
Like, and I don't think that's talked about. And I know that can seem really scary to some people, but it's like that's going to be the reality for certain people. And I think it's important to make sure that is expressed and talked about, and made clear that, something might be wrong, and this might be a sign that you need to talk to a doctor. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, and I think that's just, we're kind of taught to grin and bear it a little bit. Like, oh, so what? You have a headache and your back hurts so bad that like you can barely stand up straight. You're fine. Like, are we sure about that? Like, is like there's treatment and there's stuff that can be done to help. But also the thing is, it's just like I feel like, women's health is kind of glossed over in a lot of aspects.
Oh,
And so we never
absolutely.
really get that research done that we need to. It's just like, oh, we brush things off as like, oh, that's just something that happens to women. And it's just like, okay, but why? Like, why
Yeah.
does this one thing disproportionately affect women? And it's we don't have that research in place that we really need.
Yeah, no, and I think it's really hard too, because it's like when we say something like, oh, it can be really painful, you can go through all these different things. It's like pain thresholds are so different for so many different people that it's like what might feel normal, like you might think, oh, it hurts and this is just like what periods are supposed to be. It's like you're not actually going to know necessarily unless you talk to somebody, if that makes sense. Like, yeah, periods can really suck, but it's more than just that. Like sometimes it is something where you do need to talk to somebody, but if the only thing that you're told is like, yeah, periods kind of suck, like you're not going to go to a doctor and be like, hey, my period feels like this doesn't seem right, like the way my body's responding to this just doesn't feel right, it's really painful, it's really difficult for me, that kind of idea. You just might, like you said, grin and bear it and kind of just suck it up along the way and be like, oh, everyone's period hurts this much, and it's like, no, I promise it's in some cases it's not like that. Like it's really and it's so key to telling people that and making sure, and the idea of like tracking periods and like making sure that, because your period can kind of tell you what's going on, and the way your body responds to your period can offer some indicators about, where your health might be or how you're feeling. Like even the idea of like skipping a period because you're stressed, stuff like that. It's like it's kind of a way that your body can tell you something, and it's good to kind of know what your baseline is and where you're starting out and what is normal and what you should have to deal with versus, what you just feel like you have to deal with.
Yep, exactly. That is spot on.
And then, okay, so kind of wrapping all of this up, is there anything that you've learned? I know we've kind of touched on a whole bunch of different things that are missing, but is there anything where if you could make sure it was absolutely mentioned, like if every person knew this, is there anything you would want to be integrated into like sex ed, or anything that you think is missing that feels absolutely vital, like cannot be missed?
Oh gosh, there's so much that is missing. And I think just the fact that it differs from system to school system and family to family and all of that I'm going to find it a little bit difficult to generalize as to what's the most important, but I think I would really like more about like just what we were talking about, periods and women's health and stuff like that. And I think that's important for everyone to know about, and I don't think that's focused on quite enough.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. This was wonderful.
Yeah, this was really, this is like cathartic. I don't know. I feel like this was just like really fun. Hi, everyone. Before we, tune out, I just wanted to say thank you so much for listening to this episode of Sex Ed Taught Me. Thank you for supporting this podcast and supporting this kind of, ridiculous hodgepodge idea that I came up with, just, because I wanted to see it and try it out and see what happens. A huge thank you to Jake Miller, who is the editor and kind of just he mixes the podcast, he puts this all together for us. I honestly think he's the reason why you're even hearing it right now. So huge thank you to him, and huge thank you to our guests who are coming onto the show. If you are interested, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at SexEdTaughtMe, so hopefully it should be pretty easy to find. And if you want to send anything in to us, if you would like to be a guest, if you just have a funny story you'd like to share, if you have any questions or things you want to clarify, or whatever reason it might be, you can also email us at sexedtaughtme@gmail.com. But again, thank you so much for tuning in, and see you next time.